Today we're going to begin one of my very favorite medieval works, Sir Gawain and the Green Knight. So here is a brief introduction to guide you through your reading. Well, we don't know who wrote Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, but you'll see him referred to often as the Pearl Poet. So he's an anonymous author, but we call him the Pearl Poet, and the way he got that name is that one of the four works he wrote is called The Pearl. So we do believe that there are four works written by this author, indicated by their similar style. They're all in a single manuscript. The four works that he wrote are Patience, Purity, Gawain and the Green Knight, and Pearl. And if you read them all together, there are some links between them. Gawain and the Green Knight in the original, for example, contains the word pearl a number of times, especially near the conclusion, and that's often lost in translation. At any rate, Patience is a story of, you'd think it'd be about Job, but it isn't. It's the story of Jonah and the whale. Purity is a compilation of biblical stories. Gawain and the Green Knight is a romance, and then Pearl is a very popular genre known as the dream vision. And this particular dream vision is about a man who has lost his daughter. He has a dream that brings him great comfort. So those are the four works written by this author. And here's a screenshot of the manuscript, a far cry from the nice normalized version that we have. The edition that we're working with, the text that we're working with, also has a lot of good research and a lot of good materials that can help guide your reading. So what do we know about this guy, the Pearl Poet? Well, not a lot. He lived in northern England. We know this because of the dialect. He lived in England in the 15th century, and that was the same time Chaucer lived. However, if you have ever read Chaucer's Canterbury Tales in the original Middle English, and then I were to turn you loose with Gawain and the Green Knight in the original, you would have trouble because the dialect is very different. We believe the Pearl Poet was religious. All of his works are religious in nature. Gawain and the Green Knight is the most secular, but even it has some religious implications. And third, we believe that the Pearl Poet, well, he seemed to be patriotic. His work, especially in the opening, seems to be a tribute to England. He opens up a lot like Geoffrey of Monmouth opened up his History of the Kings of Britain, tracing the origins of England back to Felix Brutus, which, remember, that's not at all actually the case of how England was established, but they thought that it led credibility to their works. He also establishes that his tale takes place far beyond the French sea, far away from Chrétien de Troyes and those French writers who popularized Arthur. So it's almost as if he's trying to remind his audience that Arthur is, after all, an English hero. This work consists of three primary motifs. A motif is a recurring story element. So the three motifs to look for here are the beheading scene. This story opens up with a beheading, then a temptation scene, and then finally a scene called the exchange of winnings. Structure. Gawain and the Green Knight is divided into four distinct sections, which we call fits. Whereas most romances, like Lancelot, are very rambling. It's a series of adventures that's digressive. Gawain and the Green Knight has a nice, neat structure. It certainly makes it easier to put yourself on a reading schedule. And these sections or structures, there are four of them, they're called fits. So fit one sets up the narrative. It introduces the beheading challenge. The second fit is transitional, with special focus on Gawain's armor. The third fit contains both the temptation and motifs and the exchange of winnings. And then the fourth fit returns to the beheading and wraps things up, ties in the other motifs. If you notice, if you look at your text, look at the structure of the stanzas, and you'll see like a big fat stanza, and then there are five little lines at the end. And those are known as the bobbin wheel. And this is a sewing term, like the bobbin on a sewing machine. So these little five lines at the end. The first is very short. It's called the bob, and the other four are called the wheel. And throughout the work, another thing that weaves it together very nicely is that the bob and the wheel serve to sum up a stanza or to transition into a new one. This work also alliterates. It's part of a movement in England called the alliterative revival, and that's another way that the lines and the stanzas are linked together. So it really has a very beautiful structure. Okay, here's some things to pay attention to as we read this work. Number one, the introduction's emphasis on patriotism. We already talked about that. Two, the Green Knight barges into Arthur's court quite rudely. Notice what he's wearing, because it isn't armor. And notice what he carries in his hands, because they don't know what to think of him. He's got a holly bob in one hand, and he's got an axe, a big axe in the other. It's the holly bob is a symbol of peace, and then the axe, it's not a real conventional weapon, but it's nonetheless a pretty intimidating weapon. So it's as if someone barged into your dining room with a peace sign in one hand and a Uzi in the other. What do you do? I think I would run. Notice the topical details. Notice the descriptions of armor. They would have loved to describe embroidery work. They would have loved the audience would have loved to read about the ornate castles. And another thing, keep in mind, Arthurian romance is always anachronistic. So this 14th century writer is putting the Green Knight in 14th century armor. He is describing a 14th century castle. Notice Arthur's reaction to the Green Knight. Is he hot-headed? Well, the king is too important to risk his life by engaging in such a challenge, and so the court has to stop him. It's interesting to see how that happens, but also interesting to see how the text casts Arthur. Arthur is young in this work, so maybe there's some subtle criticism. In the second fit, look at Gawain's attire, especially look at his shield. It's really important. Look at what's on the front of it, and then also think about what's on the back. I'll let you figure that out for yourself. Notice the challenges that Gawain faces on his way to meet the Green Knight. These challenges, for Chrétien de Troyes, they would have taken, hundreds of pages maybe, but for the Pearl Poet, there's just a little stanza or two. He arrives at a host at the castle of a stranger, really, but remember, hospitality is an important part of romance, and the host proposes a game. It's not just a game, though. Gawain makes an oath that he'll abide by it. Notice Gawain's tactics in refusing the lady and in exchanging winnings with the Lord. I'm going back a minute to the pentangle and to a major theme of this work. So on the front of Gawain's shield is this symbol, an endless knot. And at that time, this endless knot was a symbol of England. First of all, it was a patriotic symbol. And as the Pearl Poet explains, it also represented chivalry, knightly perfection. And you'll find a passage where each of the 5 points of the star is explained in terms of chivalry. At the end of the work, Gawain does not replace the pentangle, but the focus isn't on it. Instead, he puts on something else that replaces it, a sash given to him by a lady. And as I told you before, do also pay attention to what's on the inside of the shield, because as Gawain is fighting, if he were in battle, what he would be looking at would be on the other side of the shield. So that's really important. And Gawain's a religious knight, so there's a hint to what's on the other side of the shield. If it were Lancelot, it'd probably be a picture of Guinevere. Okay, so here's the problem for Gawain. Well, so he stays at the home of this host, Bertilac Haut Desert. He agrees to a game that every day the host will go out hunting and Gawain will stay in bed, and he agrees that they'll exchange winnings at the end of the day. Well, what happens to Gawain is that the host's wife comes in his room every day and tries to seduce him. And Gawain has a problem, and it's a chivalric problem. First of all, if the lady comes in and offers herself to him, he can't turn her down rudely. That would be unchivalrous. An Arthurian knight must obey the wishes of the ladies. Gawain has a sort of ladies' man reputation traditionally. By the way, Gawain is also another way the work is traditionally English. Gawain is typically featured in English romances as the hero. So at any rate, he appears an unusual dilemma for him in that he can't turn down the lady. He also, however, cannot accept the lady's offer because he's a guest in her husband's home. He's made an oath to her husband. It wouldn't be very good to sleep with your host's wife. And finally, to accept the lady's offer would put his soul in jeopardy. He's days away from what appears to be certain death, and he would not want to die with such a sin on his soul. So this reflects a problem with the chivalric code. A knight should be loyal to lord, lady, and God, and that is impossible in Gawain's case. How can you be loyal to your lord, which the host isn't his true lord, but when you're staying in someone's house, you abide by their rules. If the lord's wife is coming on to him, how can you be faithful to God if you're sleeping with a married woman? How can you be faithful to a lady who requests something of you? If she's married to your host or lord. So poor Gawain can't win. So what do you make of the ending? Well, first of all, some other things to look at. The Green Chapel, it is not what Gawain thinks. It's actually probably a funeral barrow, much like you'd find in Beowulf. See if you can figure out why the Green Knight doesn't just kill Gawain. Who is the Green Knight actually? His real identity is revealed. Why is he turned green? Who's done this to him? That's revealed as well. And finally, how do Arthur and his court respond to the sash that Gawain takes back with him? Also, by the way, so the Gawain is supposed to exchange winnings at the end of each day, and what he wins in the bedroom with the lady, and it ends up being a kiss each day. And some student always asks, well, what if Gawain hadn't been so true and he slept with the lady? What would happen with the exchange of winnings? Well, sorry, guys, that's a different story. Don't even go there. Gawain does his best to turn her down. He does end up with a sash. Does he pass the test? If he represents the court, do they pass the test? So these are some questions to think about. And finally, I'm going to leave you with this really awful clip from a movie called The Sword of the Valiant. It starts out based on Gawain and the Green Knight, and from there it goes on to kind of a rambling tale that's not really closely related. And it stars Sean Connery, who did some really crappy stuff, believe it or not. So I'm going to leave you with this 2-minute clip. Check that out, and then get started with Gawain and the Green Knight. And let me know if you have any questions. I sure hope you'll enjoy it.